Don't let the receptionist anywhere near my VIP guests tonight. The words sliced through the busy executive floor so casually that Ethan Carter barely looked up from the tablet in his hand. Around him, assistants hurried between offices, elevator doors opened and closed, and the final preparations for Carter Global's annual winter charity ball filled the building with nervous energy. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit and continued walking toward the conference room. I mean it, he added. One wrong impression can cost millions. A few employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Near the reception desk, Sophie Bennett lowered her eyes to the computer screen in front of her, pretending she hadn't heard him. She had heard every word. She always did. The lobby of Carter Global gleamed with polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Everything in the building reflected success, ambition, and wealth. Everything except Sophie, at least in Ethan's opinion. Her oversized glasses rested on the bridge of her nose. Her blonde hair was tied back in a simple bun. Her navy cardigan looked plain compared to the designer outfits worn by executives rushing through the lobby. To Ethan, she blended into the background like another piece of office furniture. Invisible, replaceable, easy to overlook. Sophie forced a polite smile as a client approached the desk. Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. Your meeting is on the 23rd floor. Elevator bank B is ready for you. The client smiled warmly. Thank you, Sophie. You always remember. She nodded. Have a great meeting. As the elevator doors closed, she released a slow breath. Across the lobby, Ethan was already surrounded by investors and board members. Not once did he glance her way. Not once did he notice that she had arrived an hour early every day for nearly 2 years. Not once did he realize she stayed late to help employees solve problems that weren't part of her job description. To him, she was simply the receptionist. The woman behind the desk. The woman who didn't belong in his world. Ignore him, said Marcus, one of the security guards, stopping by the reception area. The boss thinks everybody is a spreadsheet. Sophie laughed softly. He's under pressure. Still doesn't make it right. She shrugged, refusing to complain. Complaining never paid medical bills. Complaining never helped her mother through another treatment appointment. Complaining never changed how people saw her. Upstairs, Ethan entered the boardroom and prepared for another day of negotiations, completely unaware that the woman he dismissed every morning carried dreams far larger than the desk where she sat. Hidden inside her worn leather tote bag was a sketchbook she guarded more carefully than her wallet. Hundreds of pages filled with elegant dress designs, runway concepts, and ideas she rarely showed anyone. Dreams from another life. Dreams she had buried beneath responsibility. As afternoon sunlight poured through the glass walls of the lobby, Sophie answered calls, greeted guests, and quietly solved problems before anyone noticed them. Yet every time she caught a glimpse of the massive banner advertising the winter charity ball hanging above the entrance, a strange feeling stirred inside her chest. She didn't know it yet, but the event Ethan believed would showcase his success was about to change both of their lives forever. That evening, long after most of the executives had gone home, the bright lights of the Carter Global lobby still reflected across the polished marble floor. Sophie remained behind her desk, finishing a stack of visitor logs while the cleaning crew moved quietly through the building. Outside, the Chicago skyline shimmered against the dark winter sky, and snowflakes drifted past the towering windows. Her phone vibrated softly. A text message from her mother appeared on the screen. Do not work too late, sweetheart. I am feeling much better tonight. Sophie smiled despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. She quickly replied, wishing it were true. The treatments had been difficult lately, and every hospital bill seemed larger than the last. After sending the message, she reached into her tote bag and carefully pulled out the worn sketchbook hidden beneath a stack of paperwork. The leather cover showed years of use. The corners were bent, and several pages stuck out unevenly from being opened so often. Yet the moment she touched it, her tired expression softened. She flipped through pages filled with elegant evening gowns, flowing silhouettes, and detailed sketches of women standing confidently beneath sparkling ballroom lights. It was a world completely different from the reception desk, a world she had once believed she might enter, before life demanded something else, before responsibilities became heavier than dreams. She paused on one particular design, a silver gown with delicate hand-drawn details running along the fabric like falling stars. It had been her favorite for years. "Still drawing those dresses?" a familiar voice asked. Sophie quickly looked up to see Marcus standing nearby holding a paper cup of coffee. She laughed. "You caught me. You say that every time." He handed her the cup. "And every time I tell you those designs belong on runways." Sophie shook her head. "Runways cost money. Reception desks pay bills." Marcus studied her for a moment. "One day somebody is going to see what you can do." Sophie glanced back at the sketchbook and smiled politely, but she did not answer. Deep down, she had stopped waiting for people to notice. Meanwhile, several floors above, Ethan sat alone in his office overlooking the city. His annual charity ball was only days away, and preparations seemed endless. Reports covered his desk. Investor updates filled his inbox. Yet one issue kept resurfacing throughout the evening. Guest relations. Sponsors had specifically praised the professionalism of Carter Global's front office. 3 separate emails mentioned the same employee by name: Sophie Bennett. Ethan frowned as he read the latest message. A major donor described her as warm, efficient, and unforgettable. Unforgettable seemed like an odd word. He leaned back in his chair. How could a receptionist attract so much attention? The question lingered longer than he expected. Downstairs, Sophie packed her sketchbook away and prepared to leave. As she stepped outside into the cold Chicago night, snowflakes settled softly on her coat. Across the street, a large digital billboard suddenly illuminated the darkness. An advertisement for the upcoming winter charity ball filled the screen. Elegant couples danced beneath crystal chandeliers while cameras flashed around them. Sophie stopped walking. For a brief moment, she imagined one of her own designs inside that ballroom. Then the image disappeared as the advertisement changed. She pulled her coat tighter and continued toward the train station, unaware that the event she had just been staring at was already beginning to pull her life in a direction she never expected. The next morning arrived with a bitter Chicago wind that rattled the glass doors of Carter Global before sunrise. Sophie was already at her desk when the first employees entered the lobby carrying coffee cups and winter coats dusted with snow. As always, she greeted each person with the same warm smile, regardless of title or salary. Most smiled back. Some stopped to chat. Others thanked her for favors she barely remembered doing. By 8 o'clock, the lobby had transformed into a stream of conversations, ringing phones, and hurried footsteps. Sophie managed everything with calm efficiency. She directed visitors, fixed scheduling conflicts, tracked deliveries, and somehow kept the entire front office running smoothly without drawing attention to herself. Around mid-morning, the elevator doors opened and Ethan stepped into the lobby accompanied by Vanessa Sinclair, the company's polished director of public relations. Vanessa looked flawless as usual, dressed in an expensive cream-colored suit that seemed designed to attract attention. She glanced toward the reception desk and lowered her voice. "I still do not understand why you keep her at the front entrance." Ethan barely looked up from the messages on his phone. "Who?" Vanessa nodded toward Sophie. "The receptionist." Ethan followed her gaze for a brief moment. "She does her job." "Exactly. Nothing more." Vanessa smiled. "Image matters. Especially before the ball." Sophie pretended not to hear them, but every word reached her ears. Years of working reception had taught her how to remain invisible when necessary. Ethan continued walking toward the elevators. "As long as guests are happy, I do not care." The doors closed behind them. Vanessa's expression tightened slightly. For reasons Sophie could not understand, Vanessa seemed to dislike her from the very beginning. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. During her lunch break, Sophie sat alone in a small employee lounge with a homemade sandwich and her sketchbook hidden beneath a magazine. She carefully opened to a blank page and began drawing. The pencil moved almost automatically. Elegant fabric lines appeared, then sleeves, then a flowing silhouette. Within minutes, an entire gown emerged from the paper. Designing always felt different from the rest of her life. It was the only place where limitations disappeared. The only place where bills, hospital appointments, and long workdays could not follow her. "That is beautiful." Sophie looked up quickly. An older woman stood nearby holding a cup of tea. Her silver hair framed a kind face, and her eyes sparkled with curiosity. Sophie immediately recognized her. Margaret Carter, Ethan's mother. "Mrs. Carter." Sophie closed the sketchbook halfway. "I am sorry. I did not realize anyone was here." Margaret smiled gently. "Do not hide it. Talent should not live in shadows. Sophie felt heat rise to her cheeks. It is only a hobby. No, Margaret said softly. That is a dream. Before Sophie could respond, Margaret glanced at the sketchbook once more. You remind me of someone I used to be. The older woman smiled warmly before leaving the room. Sophie sat frozen for several seconds. Across town, Margaret's words lingered in her mind long after lunch ended. Meanwhile, upstairs, Ethan entered his office and found his mother already waiting beside the window overlooking the city. You should pay more attention to the people around you, she said without greeting. Ethan loosened his tie and frowned. Good afternoon to you too. Margaret smiled knowingly, especially the young woman downstairs. Ethan sighed. Not this again. But as he turned toward his desk, he found himself unexpectedly wondering why so many people seemed to notice Sophie Bennett, while he continued seeing only the receptionist behind the desk. Over the next several days, Sophie found herself thinking about Margaret Carter's words more often than she wanted to admit. Talent should not live in shadows. The sentence echoed in her mind while she answered phone calls, greeted visitors, and organized schedules from behind the reception desk. Yet every evening, when she returned to her small apartment on the north side of Chicago, reality waited for her. Medical statements sat neatly stacked on the kitchen counter. Prescription costs were highlighted in yellow marker. Her mother's next treatment appointment was circled on the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Dreams belonged inside sketchbooks. Responsibilities belonged in real life. One snowy Thursday afternoon, the lobby grew unusually busy as preparations for the winter charity ball intensified. Delivery teams arrived carrying decorations. Florists wheeled in samples. Event planners rushed through the building discussing guest lists and seating arrangements. Sophie handled each interruption with her usual calm efficiency. Near 4 o'clock, Vanessa Sinclair stepped out of an elevator holding a tablet and a folder filled with event documents. She stopped at the reception desk and offered a smile that somehow felt colder than the weather outside. Sophie, I have a task for you. Sophie looked up immediately. Of course. Vanessa placed an envelope on the desk. The company has a few extra invitations for the ball. We thought it would be nice to include support staff this year. Sophie blinked in surprise. The ball. You are part of the company, are you not? Vanessa replied smoothly. Sophie carefully picked up the envelope. Gold lettering shimmered against the cream-colored paper. For a moment, she thought she might be dreaming. Employees at her level were rarely invited to events like this. Thank you, she said sincerely. Vanessa's smile widened slightly. Do not thank me. Just make sure you follow the dress code exactly. She tapped the attached information card before walking away. Sophie watched her disappear across the lobby. Something about the interaction felt strange, but excitement quickly pushed the feeling aside. Later that evening, after the building had quieted, Sophie opened the envelope again and studied every detail. Formal attire required. Black tie event. Grand ballroom at the Lakeshore Crown Hotel. She laughed softly to herself. She had never attended anything remotely similar. Across the city, Ethan sat through another planning meeting for the ball. Names, sponsors, and schedules filled the discussion, but his attention drifted when someone mentioned employee attendance. Support staff too? He asked. One organizer nodded. Public relations suggested it. Good optics. Ethan shrugged. It hardly mattered to him who attended. His focus remained on investors and donors. Yet later, as he exited the meeting, he unexpectedly noticed Sophie leaving the lobby with the invitation tucked carefully beneath her arm. She looked different somehow. Not physically, just happy. The observation lingered longer than it should have. That night, Sophie arrived home and immediately opened her sketchbook. For the first time in years, she turned to a blank page and began designing something for herself. Her pencil moved quickly beneath the warm kitchen light. Lines became fabric. Fabric became elegance. Elegance became possibility. Outside, snow drifted quietly across the city streets. Inside, Sophie sketched late into the night, completely unaware that the invitation resting beside her notebook was not the gift it appeared to be. Somewhere else in Chicago, Vanessa smiled as she reviewed a copy of the ball's actual dress code. The information card she had given Sophie was not the same version sent to everyone else. The following week seemed to move faster than the rest of the year combined. Everywhere Sophie looked, conversations revolved around the winter charity ball. Executives discussed sponsors. Assistants coordinated schedules, Event planners rushed through the lobby carrying samples of centerpieces and seating charts. Yet despite all the excitement surrounding the event, Sophie found herself focused on something much smaller. The dress taking shape inside her sketchbook. Every evening after visiting her mother, she returned to her apartment and worked on the design. The silver gown she had imagined years ago slowly evolved into something new, something more personal. She adjusted details, erased lines, and added fresh ideas until the pages seemed almost alive beneath her pencil. For the first time in a long while, she felt excited about something that belonged entirely to her. At Carter Global, however, a different kind of attention was beginning to form around her. Ethan noticed it first during a meeting with several long-term clients. As he escorted the group through the lobby, one of the investors stopped beside the reception desk. "Sophie, thank you for helping my assistant last month," the man said warmly. "You saved us a major headache." Another guest laughed. "She helped me too. Honestly, she runs this place better than most executives." Sophie smiled politely while Ethan stood nearby listening. After the clients walked away, he found himself glancing back toward the desk. The interaction bothered him for reasons he could not explain. It was not jealousy. It was confusion. People seemed drawn to Sophie in a way that made little sense to him. She was quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. At least that was what he had always assumed. Later that afternoon, Ethan stepped into an elevator with his mother. Margaret studied him carefully before speaking. "You are thinking about her again." Ethan sighed. "I am thinking about why everyone else seems fascinated by her." Margaret smiled knowingly. "Perhaps because they see something you do not." Ethan shook his head. "You make it sound mysterious." "Sometimes people are." The elevator doors opened, but her words stayed with him. Meanwhile, Sophie received an unexpected phone call from the hospital. Her mother's latest test results were encouraging. Not perfect, but encouraging. It was the first genuinely hopeful news she had heard in months. Tears filled her eyes after she hung up the phone. She quickly wiped them away before anyone could notice. Unfortunately, someone already had. Marcus approached the desk. "Good news." Sophie nodded. "The best news I have heard all year." "Then you should celebrate." She laughed softly. "Maybe after the ball." Across the lobby, Vanessa watched the exchange from a distance. The more people liked Sophie, the more irritated she became. She had spent years building influence inside Carter Global. Yet somehow a receptionist with oversized glasses received more genuine affection than she did. Vanessa folded her arms. Soon, she thought. Very soon. That evening, Sophie returned home carrying groceries and a growing sense of optimism. After dinner, she opened her sketchbook and spread several pages across the kitchen table. For hours, she worked on the final details of the gown. By midnight, she leaned back and smiled. The design was finished. What she did not know was that while she celebrated that small victory, Vanessa was finalizing plans of her own. Plans designed to turn the upcoming ball into the most embarrassing night of Sophie's life. And only a few days remained before everything would begin. 3 days before the winter charity ball, a nervous excitement seemed to float through Carter Global like electricity before a storm. Employees discussed seating arrangements in elevators. Event planners rushed through hallways carrying clipboards. Every television screen in the building displayed promotional footage for the charity event. Sophie tried to focus on work, but every time she glanced at the invitation resting inside her desk drawer, her stomach fluttered. She still could not believe she had been invited. During lunch, she slipped into the employee lounge and reviewed the dress code card once again. Formal silver attire preferred. Guests encouraged to embrace modern fashion themes. The instructions seemed unusual, but she was hardly an expert on luxury events. If anything, she felt relieved. The silver gown she had designed matched the description perfectly. Across the building, Vanessa sat inside her office reviewing the official event guidelines. The authentic dress code required classic black evening wear for women and traditional tuxedos for men. No silver theme existed. No modern fashion concept existed. The card Sophie had received was entirely fabricated. Vanessa smiled as she imagined the reaction when a receptionist arrived looking completely out of place among Chicago's wealthiest guests. For the first time in weeks, the thought brought her satisfaction. Later that afternoon, Sophie was organizing visitor passes when Margaret Carter approached the reception desk. "You look happy today," Margaret said warmly. Sophie laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" "A little." Margaret leaned closer. Something good happened? Sophie hesitated before answering. I am going to the ball. Genuine delight appeared in Margaret's eyes. That is wonderful. Sophie nodded. Honestly, I am terrified. Margaret smiled. Sometimes wonderful things begin that way. As they spoke, Ethan crossed the lobby carrying a folder of financial reports. He noticed the conversation immediately. His mother looked more animated than usual. Sophie was smiling. The sight felt strangely unexpected. He slowed his pace without realizing it. There you are, Margaret called toward him. I was just talking to Sophie. Ethan stopped beside the desk. About what? The ball. Sophie lowered her eyes slightly. Mrs. Carter was being encouraging. Ethan gave a brief nod. Enjoy the evening. The words sounded polite enough, but they carried no real interest. Moments later, he continued toward the elevators, already thinking about business matters. Yet as the doors closed, he found himself recalling the excitement he had seen in Sophie's expression. It was different from the ambition he usually encountered. Simpler, more genuine. That evening, Sophie visited her mother after work. They sat together beneath the soft glow of a hospital room lamp while snow drifted outside the window. You should go, her mother said after hearing about the event. You deserve one night for yourself. Sophie smiled. I do not even know if I belong there. Her mother reached for her hand. You belong anywhere your heart takes you. The words stayed with Sophie long after she returned home. Near midnight, she carefully removed the nearly completed gown from its garment bag and held it against the light. Silver fabric shimmered softly across the room. For a brief moment, she imagined herself walking confidently into the ballroom, not as a receptionist, not as someone struggling to survive, simply as herself. What she did not know was that the invitation in her hand had already become the centerpiece of someone else's plan, and in only a few days, the night she dreamed about would begin with a humiliation carefully designed to make her disappear. The night of the winter charity ball arrived beneath a sky filled with drifting snow and glittering city lights. The Lakeshore Crown Hotel stood like a palace overlooking Lake Michigan, its grand entrance illuminated by golden chandeliers visible even through the towering glass windows. Luxury cars lined the entrance while photographers captured arriving guests dressed in elegant black evening attire. Inside the ballroom, conversations floated through the air alongside soft music and the sparkle of crystal decorations. Ethan moved easily through the crowd, greeting investors, donors, and business leaders who had traveled from across the country for the event. Everything appeared perfect, exactly as planned. Nearby, Vanessa stood with a glass of sparkling water, watching the entrance every few minutes. She was waiting for the moment her carefully arranged surprise would unfold. At 7:45, the ballroom doors opened once again. Sophie stepped inside and immediately felt her heart sink. Everywhere she looked, women wore sophisticated black gowns. Men wore traditional tuxedos. Elegant simplicity dominated the room. For several seconds, she stood frozen near the entrance, suddenly aware that she was the only person dressed in silver. The gown she had spent weeks creating shimmered softly beneath the lights. It was beautiful, but it clearly did not match the rest of the event. Her stomach tightened. The realization hit her instantly. Something was wrong. The dress code card. Vanessa. The invitation. Around the room, a few curious glances drifted toward her. Sophie lowered her eyes, fighting the urge to turn around and leave immediately. Then she took a slow breath. Her mother had told her she belonged anywhere her heart took her. Margaret had told her talent should not live in shadows. For the first time in years, Sophie decided not to hide. She lifted her chin and continued walking into the ballroom. The effect was immediate. Conversations began slowing. Heads turned. One by one, guests looked toward the entrance. The silver gown flowed gracefully with every step. Delicate details caught the light like scattered stars. The design was elegant without being extravagant, sophisticated without trying to impress. Most importantly, it looked unlike anything else in the room because it had been created by someone who genuinely loved fashion rather than someone following trends. Across the ballroom, Ethan paused in the middle of a conversation. At first, he simply noticed movement near the entrance. Then his eyes found the woman responsible for it. For several seconds, he did not recognize her. The oversized glasses were gone. Her hair fell softly around her shoulders. The confidence in her posture transformed her completely. Yet it was not the dress that left him speechless. It was the realization that he was looking at Sophie Bennett, the receptionist, the woman he had barely noticed for 2 years. The room seemed strangely quiet as she crossed the ballroom floor. Guests whispered to one another. Several women admired the gown. Men watched with open curiosity. Ethan could not look away. For the first time, he saw what everyone else had apparently seen all along. Not an employee sitting behind a desk. Not a background figure. A remarkable woman. Across the room, Vanessa's smile disappeared completely. The humiliation she had planned was not happening. Instead of becoming a joke, Sophie had become the center of attention. And as Ethan continued staring in stunned silence, something else happened that neither of them expected. For the first time in his life, he began questioning whether he had been blind all along. For the next several minutes, Sophie wished she could disappear into the crowd, but the opposite seemed to happen. Everywhere she turned, people wanted to speak with her. Women complimented her gown. Event organizers asked which designer had created it. Business leaders who had never noticed the receptionist from the lobby suddenly introduced themselves with eager smiles. Sophie answered politely, still trying to process the fact that she had survived what should have been a humiliating disaster. Near the center of the ballroom, Margaret Carter watched the reactions with quiet satisfaction. She had recognized Sophie's talent the moment she saw those sketches. Now everyone else was beginning to see it too. Across the room, Ethan remained distracted from every conversation placed in front of him. Investors discussed expansion plans. Donors talked about upcoming projects. Yet his attention kept drifting back toward the silver gown moving through the ballroom. He found himself noticing details he had never bothered to notice before. The way Sophie listened carefully when someone spoke. The way she smiled with genuine warmth rather than practiced charm. The way people seemed comfortable around her within seconds. It made no sense. Or perhaps it made too much sense. You have barely heard a word I have said. Ethan turned to find Vanessa standing beside him. Sorry, what were you saying? Her expression tightened. Exactly. Before Ethan could answer, a voice nearby captured everyone's attention. Excuse me, but I have to ask. A tall man with dark hair approached Sophie, holding a champagne glass. Who designed that gown? Sophie smiled nervously. Actually, I did. The man blinked in surprise. You are serious? I am. He laughed warmly. Then I would like to meet the designer responsible. Ryan Walker. Several nearby guests immediately recognized the name. Ryan was one of Chicago's fastest-rising real estate investors, known for backing creative talent and luxury brands. Sophie shook his hand politely. Sophie Bennett. Well, Sophie Bennett, your work is extraordinary. Ethan watched the exchange from across the ballroom. Something uncomfortable stirred in his chest as Ryan continued talking with obvious interest. A few minutes later, the two were still engaged in conversation. Ryan appeared genuinely fascinated by her ideas. Sophie seemed relaxed in a way Ethan had rarely seen at the office. Interesting, isn't it? Margaret's voice appeared beside him. Ethan looked toward his mother. What is? Watching someone discover value after overlooking it for years. Ethan frowned. That is not what is happening. Margaret raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Meanwhile, Ryan and Sophie moved toward one of the displays showcasing projects funded by the charity foundation. They discussed architecture, design, and creativity. To Sophie's surprise, Ryan treated her opinions seriously. He asked questions. He listened. He seemed interested in who she was rather than where she worked. The conversation felt effortless. Across the room, Ethan noticed himself watching every smile, every laugh, every moment. The realization irritated him immediately. Ryan could speak with whoever he wanted. Sophie could enjoy the evening. None of it should matter. Yet somehow it did. For the first time all night, Ethan experienced a feeling completely unfamiliar to him. It was not confusion. It was not curiosity. As he watched another man become captivated by the woman he had spent years ignoring, a sharp and unwelcome jealousy quietly began taking root. As the evening continued, the ballroom seemed brighter, warmer, and somehow smaller to Ethan Carter. No matter where he stood, his attention kept finding Sophie. She was no longer standing quietly at the edge of the room. She was part of it. More than that, she seemed to belong there in a way he could not explain. Guests gathered around her naturally. Conversations flowed easily. Laughter followed her from one corner of the ballroom to another. It was as though the woman he had overlooked for 2 years had stepped into a spotlight that had always been waiting for her. Ryan Walker certainly seemed to think so. The young investor remained by her side for most of the evening, listening intently as she spoke about design, creativity, and the challenges of balancing dreams with responsibility. For Sophie, the conversation felt refreshing. Ryan treated her like someone whose ideas mattered. He did not ask about her job title. He did not care where she sat during the workday. He wanted to know what inspired her designs and how she learned to sketch such elegant gowns. "You should be doing this professionally," Ryan said. "This dress alone proves that." Sophie smiled. "That is kind of you to say. I am serious. People spend years studying fashion and never create something this memorable." Across the room, Ethan accepted congratulations from donors while only half listening. Every time he glanced toward Sophie, Ryan was still there. The sight irritated him more than he wanted to admit. Finally, Margaret appeared beside him once again. "You look troubled." Ethan forced a smile. "I am fine." "No, you are not." She followed his gaze toward the dance floor. "You have been watching them for nearly 20 minutes. Ethan immediately looked away. "I have not." Margaret laughed softly. "You were easier to read at 12 years old." Before Ethan could respond, the orchestra began playing a slower piece. Couples started moving toward the dance floor beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Ryan turned toward Sophie and extended his hand. "Would you honor me with a dance?" Sophie's eyes widened slightly. "I am not much of a dancer." "Neither am I," Ryan replied with a grin. "That makes two of us." After a brief hesitation, she accepted. Together they stepped onto the dance floor. The silver fabric of her gown shimmered beneath the lights as they joined the other couples. Around them, conversations quieted. Several guests watched with admiration. Sophie laughed as Ryan nearly missed a step. The moment felt effortless and genuine. Ethan felt something twist sharply inside his chest. It was an unfamiliar sensation. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals without losing composure. He had handled corporate crises without hesitation. Yet watching Sophie smile at another man unsettled him more than any business challenge ever had. He stared at the dance floor, unable to look away. The realization arrived slowly but unmistakably. The discomfort was not curiosity. It was not confusion. It was jealousy. Real jealousy. For the first time all evening, Ethan understood why Ryan's attention bothered him. It was because he wished that smile was directed at him. And the knowledge came with an even more painful realization. The woman he suddenly could not stop thinking about was the same woman he had spent years pretending not to see. Long after the dance ended, Ethan remained unsettled. The feeling followed him through every conversation, every handshake, and every speech he was expected to deliver. Even after the charity presentation concluded and guests began drifting toward dessert tables and private networking groups, his attention continued searching for Sophie. Eventually, he spotted her standing near one of the large windows overlooking the snowy shoreline of Lake Michigan. She appeared comfortable for the first time all evening, speaking with a small group of guests who seemed genuinely interested in her ideas. Before he could stop himself, Ethan started walking in her direction. Halfway there, however, Ryan Walker approached her first. Ethan immediately changed course and headed toward the bar instead. The reaction irritated him. He was acting like a teenager, not the chief executive officer of a multinational company. "You look miserable for a man hosting a successful event." Ethan glanced sideways to find his mother holding a cup of tea. "I am fine." Margaret smiled knowingly. "You keep saying that." Before he could answer, a member of the hotel staff approached carrying a small silver notebook. "Excuse me, sir. We found this near one of the lounge areas. We believe it belongs to one of your guests." Ethan accepted the item absent-mindedly. The moment he saw the worn leather cover, something clicked. He had seen it before. At the reception desk. In Sophie's hands. Her sketchbook. "Thank you," he said. The employee walked away. Ethan stared at the notebook for several seconds. He should have returned it immediately. Instead, curiosity got the better of him. He opened the cover. The first page stopped him cold. Detailed fashion illustrations filled the paper with extraordinary precision. Elegant evening gowns. Tailored jackets. Entire collections organized by season and theme. Page after page revealed a level of talent he never imagined. As he continued turning pages, the sketches became more personal. Notes filled the margins. Fabric ideas, color palettes, business concepts. dreams carefully preserved over years of effort. Then he reached a page dated nearly 5 years earlier. A newspaper clipping had been taped beside one of the designs. The headline described a prestigious Midwest Fashion Institute competition. Beneath it appeared a photograph of a younger Sophie holding an award. First place. Full scholarship recipient. Ethan frowned. He turned another page and discovered acceptance letters, recommendation notes from professors, and photographs from student showcases. Suddenly, an entire hidden life emerged from the pages. Sophie had not simply enjoyed fashion. She had been exceptional at it. A final folded document slipped from between two sketches and landed on the table. Ethan picked it up carefully. It was a withdrawal notice from the institute. The date matched the year her mother's medical treatments began. He slowly exhaled. The truth settled heavily over him. Sophie had given up her future to care for her family. While he had dismissed her as ordinary, she had quietly sacrificed opportunities most people would never receive. Every assumption he had made about her now felt painfully shallow. Every careless remark felt worse. Closing the sketchbook, Ethan looked across the ballroom. Sophie was laughing softly at something Ryan had said. For the first time, he understood that the remarkable woman standing there had always existed. The only thing that changed tonight was that he had finally opened his eyes. The charity ball ended shortly after midnight, but the impact of the evening followed everyone home. Sophie returned to her apartment, carrying her silver gown in a garment bag and her sketchbook tucked safely under one arm. She still could not believe what had happened. Strangers had admired her work. Influential people had treated her ideas with respect. For one evening, she had stepped into a version of herself she thought no longer existed. As she unlocked her apartment door, her phone vibrated. A message from Ryan Walker appeared on the screen. It was simple. It was a pleasure meeting you tonight. Do not let that talent stay hidden. Sophie smiled and set the phone aside. Across the city, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse office, staring at the sketchbook resting on his desk. The images refused to leave his mind. Every page challenged the assumptions he had carried for years. He remembered every careless remark. Every time he had dismissed Sophie without a second thought. The realization was uncomfortable because it forced him to confront something he rarely admitted. He had been wrong. The following Monday morning, Carter Global buzzed with conversations about the ball. Employees shared photographs and stories from the event. Many were still talking about the mysterious silver gown that had captured attention throughout the evening. Sophie quietly returned to her desk and resumed her routine as though nothing had happened. She answered calls, welcomed visitors, and organized schedules. Yet the atmosphere felt different. More people stopped to speak with her. More people smiled. Even some executives who had barely acknowledged her before suddenly remembered her name. Then came the rumor. It started as a whisper near the elevators before spreading across departments. According to the story, Sophie had attended the ball with one goal in mind: finding a wealthy businessman. By lunchtime, the rumor had evolved into something far uglier. Some claimed she had deliberately designed the gown to attract investors. Others insisted she had manipulated Ryan Walker's attention for personal gain. Sophie first heard the gossip while passing a conference room. She stopped in her tracks. Her face fell. The words stung more than she expected. Everything she had accomplished during the evening was being reduced to a cruel assumption. Upstairs, Vanessa listened to the growing rumors with quiet satisfaction. She never directly started them. She simply encouraged the right conversations and allowed speculation to spread on its own. By afternoon, the story had traveled through much of the company. Sophie struggled to focus on work. Every whispered conversation felt personal. Every glance seemed loaded with judgment. When Ethan entered the lobby later that day, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Sophie's usual smile was missing. Her eyes looked tired. Before he could ask, he overheard two employees discussing the rumor near the entrance. His expression hardened instantly. For the first time, he understood exactly how unfair the situation was. Yet before he could intervene, Sophie made a decision of her own. Near the end of the workday, she quietly placed an envelope on her desk. Inside was a resignation letter. She looked around the lobby one last time. The reception desk had been her world for 2 years. It had paid bills, supported her mother, and kept her life stable. But she could not remain somewhere that refused to see her for who she truly was. As the sun disappeared behind the Chicago skyline, Sophie slipped the letter into her bag and walked toward the elevators, unaware that Ethan had just seen it and that everything was about to change. The next morning, Sophie arrived at Carter Global earlier than usual. The resignation letter remained inside her bag, folded neatly and ready to submit. She had barely slept. Every rumor, every whispered conversation, every judgmental glance replayed in her mind throughout the night. By the time she stepped into the lobby, she had convinced herself that leaving was the right decision. She deserved a place where people saw her work instead of inventing stories about her character. What she did not know was that Ethan had spent most of the previous evening investigating exactly how the rumors had spread. The more questions he asked, the clearer the truth became. Certain conversations always seemed to lead back to the same source. Certain comments originated from the same department. By mid-morning, he requested an emergency meeting with senior staff. Word spread quickly throughout the building. Employees gathered inside the main conference hall, confused by the sudden announcement. Sophie remained at the reception desk until an assistant approached her. Mr. Carter would like everyone present. Reluctantly, she joined the crowd. The large room filled with executives, managers, assistants, and support staff. Vanessa sat confidently near the front, unaware that the situation was about to turn against her. Ethan stepped onto the stage at exactly 11 o'clock. The room fell silent. His expression was serious. For several seconds, he simply looked at the audience. Then he began speaking. For years, I have believed that results were the only thing that mattered. The room remained completely still. I thought performance could be measured through numbers, reports, and titles. He paused. I was wrong. Several people exchanged confused glances. Ethan continued. Over the last few days, false rumors have spread throughout this company regarding an employee whose only mistake was being talented enough to attract attention. Sophie's heart immediately began racing. Ethan looked directly toward the audience. Those rumors were encouraged by someone in a position of authority. A series of emails and messages appeared on the large screen behind him. Evidence, conversations, manipulations, patterns that pointed clearly toward Vanessa's involvement. The confidence disappeared from her face almost instantly. Murmurs spread across the room. Ethan's voice remained calm. Leadership requires integrity. Anyone willing to damage another person's reputation for personal reasons has no place at Carter Global. Vanessa attempted to defend herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. Within minutes, her employment was officially terminated. The room fell silent again as she left. Then Ethan did something nobody expected. He stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward Sophie. Hundreds of eyes followed him. Sophie froze. Ethan stopped only a few feet away. There is something else that needs to be addressed. His voice softened. For 2 years, I failed to see the person standing right in front of me. The room became so quiet that every word seemed to echo. I judged someone based on appearances and assumptions instead of character. He looked directly at Sophie. You deserved respect long before anyone noticed your dress. Long before anyone admired your talent. Long before that evening. Emotion tightened her chest. Ethan continued. The most remarkable woman in this company was the one I overlooked every single day. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. I am sorry, Sophie. The apology was simple, sincere, and completely public. For the first time since the rumors began, Sophie felt seen. Truly seen. Not as a receptionist. Not as a designer. Not as the subject of gossip. Simply as herself. And as she looked around the room, she realized something had changed. The resignation letter inside her bag suddenly felt much heavier than it had that morning. 1 year later, the Chicago skyline glowed beneath the lights of a warm spring evening as hundreds of guests gathered inside one of the city's most prestigious event venues. Cameras flashed. Reporters moved through the crowd. Fashion buyers, investors, and industry leaders filled every seat surrounding a runway that stretched across the center of the Grand Hall. Above the stage, a single title appeared in elegant silver letters. Invisible no more. Backstage, Sophie Bennett stood quietly beside a clothing rack holding the final piece of her collection. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from disbelief. 12 months earlier, she had been sitting behind a reception desk wondering if anyone would ever notice her work. Now an entire fashion show carried her name. Reviews from major publications had already praised her designs. Orders had arrived from boutiques across the country. Most importantly, her mother was healthy enough to sit proudly in the front row. Sophie glanced toward the audience and smiled when she spotted her. Nearby sat Margaret Carter, beaming with pride. Beside her sat Ethan. Over the past year, everything between them had changed slowly and honestly. There had been no grand promises at first. No shortcuts. Ethan spent months earning back trust he never should have lost. He supported Sophie's dream without trying to control it. He invested in a design incubator that provided scholarships for talented students facing financial hardship, but he never attached her name to the project without permission. He listened. He learned. He changed. Somewhere along the way, friendship became affection. Affection became love. The lights dimmed. Music filled the hall. One by one, models stepped onto the runway wearing Sophie's creations. The audience watched in admiration as silver accents, elegant tailoring, and themes of resilience flowed through the collection. Every design carried a piece of her story. Every look represented someone who had ever been overlooked. When the final model disappeared backstage, the crowd erupted into applause. Then the announcer's voice echoed through the room. "Please welcome the designer, Sophie Bennett." The audience rose to its feet. Sophie stepped onto the runway. Tears filled her eyes as applause thundered throughout the venue. She looked toward the front row and saw her mother standing. Margaret standing. Ethan standing. For a moment, she simply absorbed the sight. The dream hidden inside a worn sketchbook had become reality. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan stepped onto the runway. Confused laughter spread through the audience. Sophie looked at him in surprise. He smiled nervously, which only made the moment more sincere. Taking the microphone, he looked directly at her. "A long time ago, I thought success meant recognizing value in companies, investments, and opportunities." The room grew quiet. Then I met someone who taught me that the greatest value is often hidden where people refuse to look. Sophie's eyes immediately filled with tears. Ethan reached into his jacket and carefully removed an old leather sketchbook. The same sketchbook she had nearly lost on the night that changed everything. This book contained a dream that deserved to be seen. He smiled. And the woman who created it deserved to be seen even more. The audience listened in complete silence. Ethan lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps filled the room. "Sophie Bennett, you changed my life by teaching me how wrong I was and how much better I could become." His voice softened. "Will you spend the rest of your life with me?" For a brief moment, Sophie could not speak. Then she laughed through happy tears and nodded. "Yes." The audience exploded into applause. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her. Above them, the words "invisible no more" glowed across the stage. The sketchbook had become a fashion show. The overlooked receptionist had become a celebrated designer. And the man who once failed to see her had finally learned that true beauty was never something discovered under ballroom lights. It had been there all along.